Lions Rock Productions.
On September 18th, 1986, between the bells of 5th and 6th period, 15-year-old Heather Dunn walked out of her Spanish class, walked up to her ex-boyfriend, Leonard Rubio, who had graduated the year prior, and seconds later, in front of dozens of her friends, she was murdered. I'm Pete A. Turner, the executive producer of the Break It Down show, and this is our limited series called The Prison Chronicles. When Heather was murdered, I was a senior at the same high school in Benicia, California. Benicia is the idyllic place. It's nestled between the wine country, the Delta, and the Bay. It's the kind of place where you don't have to lock your doors, and kids are so bored because it's safe. It's really close to perfect. And yet, on that September day, Heather's murder shattered our perception of safety and a carefree life that we all lived. There's still so much damage from this one act. We all loved Heather. She was gorgeous. She was funny. She was charming. Everybody wanted to be her friend, and she was absolutely adored. I've talked to dozens of my friends about their memories and what it meant to them on that day, so I can understand the impact of what a murder does to a community. And to this day, there are open wounds. I asked my friend Gary, maybe the last person to talk to Heather, who wasn't her murderer, about his experience as he literally walks Heather to Leonard.
I was in 5th period, which happened to be Mrs. Diaz's Spanish class, and Heather and I had that class together. We were just kind of rounding out our day. The class had just ended, and we kind of met at the door. We walked out at the same time. So as Heather and I were leaving, I remember her kind of being upset and saying, it was something like, oh no, there's Leonard. So as we walked out, we could see Leonard. It was right near the entry to the school. As we were kind of parting ways, I just said, hey, are you going to be okay? And I don't remember what her response was. The trepidation she had going towards Leonard is really what has always kind of been etched in my mind for all these years now. The wondering of, a little bit of wondering, well, what if you would have walked her over there? Or what if you would have, there was a lot of what ifs for a while in my mind. And then she walked towards Leonard, maybe 20 feet, and I left her to go back towards the quad area. I don't remember much more than that, but I will always remember that, and that's going back, boy, we're talking a lot of years now.
Did you ever hear the gunshot?
No, I don't remember hearing the gunshot.
What do you see in the community as far as the harm that came from the murder?
Boy, I think the sense of tragedy at the time was palatable. I mean, I distinctly remember the family. I remember where they used to live. I don't remember the street, but I remember the little house they used to live. It was kind of on a corner. And I remember shortly after the funeral and after all the services and stuff, and it could have been a month or two or whatever, but I remember they repainted the house, and they either repainted it like dark gray or black. And it was just like a cloud. Like that house symbolized the cloud that hung over Benicia because of that event and because of, the things that happened on that fateful day.
Have you been able to forgive Leonard?
Boy, not long ago, he sent me a friend request on Facebook, and I did not accept, and I really thought about it, and that's tough. I mean, I would like to think that I'm above all that, and forgiveness is a powerful thing you can, not only receive, but to give, but no, I don't think I'm completely true, but no.
Is it possible that you can?
Yeah, what would probably, I wouldn't need an apology or anything like that. It's none of my business. It has everything to do with the Dunn family and nothing to do with me whatsoever. I would have to know more about what type of man Leonard is today. I mean, to let your emotions get so charged up that that's the end result of being in an emotional state. I've never been there, thank goodness. But it was just a tragedy. It was just, it so easily didn't have to happen, but then it did. It seemed so avoidable, but then apparently it wasn't. So how do you reconcile that?
The Prison Chronicles start right here with the victim, with the community,
because we need a point of origin. I bring in Heather's death not to take you to my hometown, because anywhere where there's a death, this is what happens. A number of my friends that I talk to still to this day can't forgive Leonard. When I've asked them, what about the Leonards in other places? Can you forgive those people if they've satisfied the requirements of the state? And a lot of them still to this day say, fuck Leonard. The pain that these crimes cause is real. And what you're about to hear are the stories from people that have committed murder, significant crimes, and they've done dozens of years in jail. But you're also going to hear from people inside the prison system working as guards. And you'll hear from academics, and you'll hear from people working in the nonprofit space, trying to understand the path of prison before, during, and after incarceration, and what life is like for all these entities inside and outside of the institution. The big question that we're trying to answer is, what condition do you want these people to be in when they walk out the door? Because the reality is, we don't throw people away. Most people, including murderers, at some point get out of prison. And if that's true, again, the question, what condition do you want that person to be in? If you take someone that's made poor choices, they've had emotional problems, whatever it is, and if I told you they have less than $1,000 in their pocket when they get out of prison, would you be hopeful for their chances for success to become a contributing member of society? Or do we just want them to be punished more? Are their lives any different than ours would be given the same circumstances? All of these lessons, all of these questions, we're going to dive into. And we're going to start right now. These are the Prison Chronicles. I want to introduce you to Honoré Vachon. He's been on the Break It Down show, and I wanted him to come back because he's got eloquence and a lot of wisdom. He was young when he first started getting into trouble with gangs in his neighborhood, but that was also normal. Coincidentally, he's from Sacramento, and I lived in Sacramento approximately at the same time. I worked at a place called Tower Rickards on Florin Road, and that happened to be Honoré's home store. He's also known as the rapper X-Rated. And throughout his time doing 26 years for murder, Honoré made money by rapping into prison phones and releasing albums professionally to wide acclaim. Among the people that get out, Honoré was in the best position financially. He owned property, he had assets, and a real chance to get out. But what's great about Honoré's story is the wisdom and his capability to take responsibility for his actions and the person that he's become now. I think you're going to love who Honoré is.
By 88, I was a year in as an active gang member. My 13th birthday, I started following my older cousin and became a member. I wouldn't call myself a gang banger at that point, because a banger is actively pursuing enemies for violent engagement. And I wasn't doing that yet, but I would represent myself as being from where I was from. And I clothed my raiment was that of a gamer. It was pretty normal. You go to a house party, it's going to be, somebody's probably going to be tripping. Somebody's probably going to brandish a weapon. Somebody may discharge a weapon. And we would weather that and go on with our night like that was the normal thing if no one was harmed. It was just to be expected.
26 years ago, Brown was the rapper X-Rated. In March of 1992, he and some fellow gang members broke into a home in Sacramento, intent on killing two of their rivals. When a shadow emerged in the hallway, Honoré and two other young men opened fire. It turns out it wasn't the rival gang members, but their mother. 42-year-old Patricia Harris lay dead with a gunshot wound to her heart.
We had celebrated the concepts of living and dying on behalf of what I call the parasite, the gang psychology. We believed it was a worthy thing to live and die for and to give your freedom for. We believed that was a legitimate, viable future. And so there was an awareness of where the road led. Very few success stories, very few positive outcomes at all. And they were almost mythical stories, like Bigfoot, Nessie, the guys who made it, who succeeded, some football league or college, high school, something. For the most part, we all knew CYA was a destination.
Yeah.
We all knew we were going to CYA. All of us who went to juvenile hall, who have been exposed to a county program, we all knew that the end result was going to be incarceration at best. And we pretended like that was acceptable.
Anna Ray Brown is on parole, living in Oakland after serving 26 years for his part in a gangland murder. More than 2 decades ago, our own Juliet Goodrich covered his trial.
Today, as Night Beat's Joe Vasquez reports, he is out and he's making music again, trying to prove that he's a changed man.
Next, I want to introduce you to Shaka Senghor, a best-selling author of a book called Righting My Wrongs, and his book made Oprah's Super Soul 100 list. But Shaka is also a murderer. In 1991, he shot and killed a man, and he did nearly 20 years in prison. 7 of those years he did in solitary confinement. And of those 7, 4.5 of them were consecutive. As you get to hear from Shaka, I want you to understand a couple of things. He's describing a battlefield. When you hear Shaka talk and describe what life was like in Detroit, it doesn't make sense to us.
I grew up in the city of Detroit. Detroit is a very tough city. The narratives that come out of that city is mostly about the crime and the culture around that. But in reality, it's a very complex city. It does have its tough things to deal with. Growing up, I grew up during the height of the crack cocaine era. Like many other people that's end up doing long-term sentences, I got kind of swept up in that whole culture around the war on drugs and everything that came with it. And, it's the typical story, growing up in a broken, dysfunctional household, end up in the streets, get caught up in street culture, make some poor decisions, end up in prison. And that was kind of that trajectory. The reality is if you go in any city, any inner city where poverty is rampant, where people of color are, the level of PTSD in those communities is unimaginable, and we haven't addressed that. I encountered gun violence very early on. My oldest brother was shot in the neck, by my brother. I was 14 years old, 13, somewhere in there. Childhood friend murder. 8 men in my family, 8 members of my family have been shot. I was shot when I was 17 years old. And, when you experience that level of trauma, like your brain doesn't function the way a rational person who doesn't have that level of trauma would normally function. And that's what we don't talk about. It's more about, you're just making bad choices, etc. And I mean, if you just look at the choices, of course it looks like a bad choice if you look at it without understanding the circumstances that choice derived from. And that's the shit we have to deal with, is we have to get down to the rawness of these things are happening in the communities for real, not, imagined, so that's what it's like, the inner city. So, and even the part about vengeance, that's all rooted in the PTSD. It's like, okay, I get shot today, likelihood is I'm going to shoot somebody in response to that if you don't get that disrupted.
I know from my time in combat zones, one of the things with young men is that there's no hope. There's no tomorrow. There's no future. And so they're easily exploited. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. I mean, the sense of hopelessness and despair in a lot of these communities is unimaginable, where, at the age of 15, you already know that you're going to get shot or you're going to get killed or you're going to end up locked up before you reach the age of 18. So, that's one of the things that has driven my work in terms of how do you disrupt that type of thinking?
Our next former inmate is Ron Self. Ron is a nice contrast between Shaka and Honore because he's a veteran. And as he explains, veterans are held to a higher standard. So why is it that we expect inner city kids who grow up in a combat zone to behave differently than someone who's trained to be in a combat zone?
It's an interesting question, and it's an interesting contrast. And there's a few other things, too, as we look at the system of incarceration and how we provision those things. We'll get to that in a later episode. But for right now, let's get to know Ron and understand where he comes from. Ron does 23 years for attempted murder.
Okay, this is Ron Self, Executive Director of Veterans Healing Veterans. So at 6 years old, I was enrolled into military prep schools as a result of going to live with my grandparents. So from that age on through college, up to the age of 22, I was doing military school, and then the formality of boot camp at MCRD San Diego in 1987. And I stayed in the Marine Corps till 1997. Shortly after that, I went to prison. I'm a combat veteran. I served in multiple areas of operation, AOs, from 87 to 97. So my childhood, an event that happened when I was 6 years old, the military, and then prison, I think they're clearly linked. It took me a decade of some pretty deep introspection to identify what that link was, to gain the insight into my actions and behaviors from my childhood that really drove me when I was in the Marine Corps. I really excelled because of certain things that went on in my childhood. Unbeknownst to me why I was excelling, I wasn't any more brave or heroic than anyone else, but I took a lot more chances and risks, not really knowing why.
Sounds familiar.
Which also led to prison. Yeah, which led to prison. Yes. When I lost emotional anchor that was the Marine Corps, I attached to something else and someone else. And that became a driving factor. And in trying to help that person, I went to prison for 23 years. What put them there? You know, that's an interesting fact that I don't know if most people, and this is in California, veterans do almost a third more time than anyone else as far as civilians for the same exact crime, primarily or solely because they're veterans. That's empirical fact.
Wow.
The VA's collected that data. So a veteran and a civilian commit the same crime. The veteran's going to do a third more time because he's a veteran. You're supposed to know better. You're trained. My crime was technically attempted murder. That was not my intent. I was able to prove that, which is why they let me out. But for attempted murder, I got 32 to life.
Right.
And there are guys that have first-degree murder that get out in 16 years. But because of I was a veteran, and not only that, because of what I did in the Marine Corps, because of the unit I was associated with and other units that I was associated with, Raid Company, Recon, Force Recon, JSOC, blah, 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 doing these different things, TAD. Because of that, they nailed me to the wall. And I can't say I don't blame them in my case. What I did, I needed to go to jail.
How do we help veterans that are in prison? Do they need something different?
So what they need to do is train veteran service officers that will actually go into, be assigned to the prisons. And they're all going to be assigned these prisons to go in and assist the veterans, not only with their benefits, so they can have benefits when they get out and ease their transition so that they don't become homeless. But also what we're doing with my program is we're also doing the PTSD trauma recognition, and we're doing transitional housing with an organization over here in Monterey. And we're expanding that program by 7 prisons this year. And that we're trying to go statewide with it. They are wanting to do everything they can to help the veteran population. They're not ignoring the rest of the population. We're talking about veterans now because that's the topic.
Right.
They're doing everything they can right now to extend programs, state and federal, to veterans incarcerated, to get them on their feet, to make them successful so they can transition out of the prison system. And we were talking about 23 years I was in prison. My entire life, I had been training to be something, right?
Yes.
That something did not involve empathy or compassion. But after 10 years in prison, right? Prison of all places, I found my compassion and I found empathy, not only for myself, but others. I also found in prison that there's strength in vulnerability.
No matter how we compare and contrast these guys, we will notice a pattern that early life damage causes reckless behavior, challenging authority, and other problems that don't make sense if you come from a stable, loving home. Next up is Kenyatta Liao. Kenyatta came up in the 90s and ultimately, through some misadventure, ended up with 3 felony strikes, in part because of the system and how it worked at that time, and ultimately earned his freedom because that system was unjust and was taking kids that were on the wrong path and completely remove them from the streets. That doesn't mean that Kenyatta didn't have some maturity to find. And again, there's childhood damage and abandonment.
Hello, everybody. I'm Crispino Kenyatta Liao. I'm the business development specialist with The Last Smile. So, yeah, I dropped out of high school in the 11th grade, and I was on this just self-destructive path. I was involved in a lot of illegal activity in the street, and much of that had to do with just me having, just a really warped perception of myself and the role that I play in my community. I was all about just getting money and just focused on, what was right in front of me. I had really no strategic kind of thought process going on. I didn't think that I was going to live past the age of 25. And so, I was living for the day, trying to party as hard as I could and have as much fun as I could. That kind of mindset led me down this path towards prison. When I look back on my life, a lot of the issues that, that came about, my behavior and the way that I viewed myself resulted from, me and from my childhood. Me and my two brothers and my mother were abandoned by my father. And the role models that I had were all in the street, and so, I grew up according to, the street code, man. And that's obviously that's a dangerous kind of mindset to have and a dangerous set of principles to have to live your life by. Many people, live by that code, and they're in those two places that I talked about. They're either dead or sitting in prison. And for me, that fear-based mindset, it just, it led to a whole bunch of like a slippery slope, man, that just took me down this path. And, I made a ton of horrible decisions that hurt a lot of people, including family members and friends, stuff that I'm really not proud of. But, I've been able to make amends and change my life. And, that's why I do the work that I do today, is to help other people do the same.
Next, we have James Hewson, who worked for something that used to be called the Richmond Project, but is now called Advance Peace. And that's Devone Bogan's project, where he went into the city of Richmond, California, where violence was sky high. And he started a different approach to the problem, recognizing that a lot of these young guys who were committing the most violent crimes in the area didn't have a set of uncles, didn't have dads, didn't have hope. They built a different system. But the guys that create the trust on the street are guys like James. James was in jail for the rest of his life and did not know if he would ever get out. While he was in, Devone said, "If you ever get out, I have a job for you, and you're going to be able to contribute back to the younger versions of you." But let's hear from James.
This is James Hewson. In 2006, I was a consumer of California's correctional facilities. I was incarcerated in San Quentin State Prison, and I was the chairman of a group called the Richmond Project, where we were men inside coming together, trying to put our differences aside to try to help the community outside in Richmond. While I was incarcerated, and I actually had a life sentence, I didn't know I was ever going to come home. At that time, it wasn't normal that you escape a life sentence. Yeah, exactly. And some young men, well, not young men, older men, did for me what I'm given the opportunity to do for these young men.
Wow.
I went there. I was a porter cleaning up in death row. And they told me I wanted to go to school. And they said that I couldn't go to school because my hours conflicted with it. And the older man, he had a lot of pull in San Quentin. And he told me, I'm going to hook it up to where it's your job. You won't be assigned to a job and you're able to go to school and take the night classes, the college courses. And so it was amazing to me. I always thought, like, this guy been incarcerated 30, 40 years, some of the guys there, and they were still willing to look out for me. Like, they seen something in me that I had never seen in myself. And so I felt like I had to do something different with my life. And so I started taking a whole lot of programs. They used to joke about me all the time, saying, "Well, you going to your 99th job?" Because I just stayed pushing. And it just, some clicked in me. Like, I was focused so much of my life of what I can get out of it. And I got to the point now, I was like, what can I give back or what I'm going to leave?
When you see Advanced Peace or the Richmond Project talked about in the news, or the ONS, you'll hear James talk about that. They talk about paying criminals to not commit crimes. Well, let me just set you straight. That's bullshit. What these guys do, their approach, it works and it saves money, and that program pays for itself.
The Office of Neighborhood Safety is focused on stopping retaliatory and reciprocal gun violence in the city of Richmond. We do that by our main focus is daily outreach, which we contact these young men where they're at each and every day. We also, once we get them engaged with the program, we have them fill out a life map where they go over goals that they want to achieve, and we help them with the process of steps to take to achieve those goals. We also have an elder circle where we hook them up with older men who've retired who are successful so they can kind of breathe into these young men and show them what could be. Exactly. We go to the young men who've mostly haven't had this type of engagement. Most people are usually looking to get away from these young men, and we're out there actively seeking them to build a relationship and a partnership with them, because the crime isn't going to stop unless they choose to make better decisions with their lives.
Not everybody goes to jail for violent crimes. You'll know Richard Bronson's story. He was a partner at Stratton Oakmont. Still not sure what that is? Those are the guys from Wolf of Wall Street. They went out, purposely stole money, and Richard went to jail. The difference was when Richard got out, he realized, I have no money, I have no place to live, I have no job. I've been a partner in a financial firm. I know how to make money. How on earth are some of these guys that I was locked up with going to do it? So Richard starts to bridge the gap for us between people who are incarcerated and those that recidivate and those that go on and transform into something better than that.
Hi, everybody. This is Richard Bronson. I'm the founder and CEO of 70 Million Jobs. Unfortunately, I also did time in Rikers Island in New York, which is arguably the very worst place on the planet of our Earth. It is Dante's Inferno to the max. It was just absolutely awful, and there was danger that was pregnant in the air. There was lurking badness all about, and it was a scary, scary place to be. And one had to be entirely on one's toes, and even then, that might only afford you the opportunity to see, while something bad was coming your way. Maybe it'd be better off not to be on your toes. I don't know, because there's probably not much chance to help you. But in any event, what goes on in prison is one issue, certainly, in that, people are treated like animals and therefore act like animals, or have no great motivation to do other than that. And that seems to be the way to survive there. And prior to going to prison, everybody talks about what you got to do and what you got to learn. Part of what you got to learn is if someone gives you a hard time, doesn't matter if you can get the shit beaten out of you, you got to go first, because you got to gain respect, or else you're going to have trouble throughout your stay there. What doesn't go on is really what prevents, any kind of progress in a person's life and the overall prison system. The outgrowth of that is recidivism. I was wrong. I knew it when I was doing it. I knew it when I was waiting to get caught. I almost wanted to get caught because it was hanging over me. It was being in that roller coaster as it slowly inches higher and higher and higher, and this is going to be bad, but at least let it happen. Let me hit the apex and start going down. And that's what I look for. I knew I was wrong. I have no excuse. I'm not saying that to make me sound better. I think it makes me sound a lot worse. I was greedy. I was stupid. I was impatient. And I worked on Wall Street. And I told myself everybody else did it. But what the fuck does that mean? Everybody else did it. Everybody's going 100 miles an hour down the highway. That doesn't make, it's still a dangerous thing that you're involved with. And I was going 100 miles an hour down the highway. So in any event, for me, going away was almost a welcome event. It was one I knew was inevitable, and I just wanted to kind of gain absolution. I thought I could, at least, by going through the process. it didn't really provide me with that. I paid everybody back long before I did my time. It's now 25 years since I did the things I did that got me in trouble, and I still feel as guilty, and I still beat myself up as much as I did when it first happened. That's my reality. That's what I got to deal with. I would argue, and the work that I'm involved with at 70 Million Jobs is to help my brothers and sisters coming out of prison get a job, because statistically it's very clear that if they don't get a job, they're going to recidivate, be rearrested very quickly. Contrary-wise, if they do get a job, chances are it'll have a happy ending. So it would seem pretty obvious, I would think, to almost anyone that help people develop trades and knowledge and expertise so that when they get out, they can get a job. And the sad truth is that there's precious little of that, if any. And as a result, you have people who've been in and out of jail and prison like a turnstile, who are getting no training, no ability, no nothing. They have no education to begin with, and they come out and they certainly, they're no better, and they're arguably a lot worse.
Finally, we have Matt Ray. Matt was abused as a child, was on a path of self-destruction, knowing full well that he was not going to stop until something horrible happened, and one night it did. He murdered someone and went to jail for well over 20 years. Matt, can you just give us a sketch of what it was like to be you growing up? And as you look back on your path, just kind of illustrate what you experienced.
One of my earliest memories, childhood, growing up, we lived in Paso Robles. It was a country setting. At that time, I had two sisters and myself. I'm the only boy, second oldest. My dad and mom weren't getting along, and she ended up, they separated. He moved, and so we were by ourselves. My mom struggled to make ends meet. She had to work two jobs. She was a waitress. So a lot of times we would be in the house alone. It's not like times today where you usually worry about that stuff. We had, we're in the country. We didn't have too many neighbors, but it was safer then. So I guess she felt like it was okay. So a lot of times before her other shift, she would check on us. Maybe we'd be asleep or whatever. And then sometimes the neighbors would check on us. What ended up happening was the father of the household across the street from us ended up molesting myself and my sister, then his own children. I found out years and years later. And, it was just something that I never talked about, never discussed. I actually kind of just blocked the whole thing out of my memory, I guess. Just kind of just shut down mentally. It wasn't until years later, I was about 11, my dad was going to reconcile with my mom. So we moved from there and came up to Fairfield, where my dad had a good job. Tried to make things work, and he ended up having an affair with somebody who later turned out to be my stepmom. So my mom felt like, I can't take this, I'm leaving. So she took my sisters and moved across town, and she just felt like I needed to live with my dad. Well, that's how that went. And there was a point when that memory resurfaced when I recalled what had happened. And from that point forward, looking back, I could really see where I was getting in fights in school. I was angry. My grades were bad. I was just abusing marijuana, 12, 13 years old, started drinking, getting disciplined and a lot of stuff that nobody could figure out. I was asked later, did something happen, because they found out about this guy, and I denied it. I was ashamed. I just kept it a secret. So going through the juvenile hall system and getting in fights and getting arrested, I ended up going to Boys Ranch at 17, got out at 18, tried marijuana, cocaine, and I just couldn't do it. It made me really paranoid. So I turned heavily to alcohol at that point. And so that was my drug of choice. I just drank, till I black out. And I guess I was just really trying to just overcome the past that I had, remembered.
Get a little more depth on this. You're angry, you're fighting. Like, what kind of reasons would you fight for? Like, what would cause you to want to go after somebody or get into a confrontation? What kind of situations?
So many of the situations that I found myself in were people that would bully somebody, people that were getting over on other people. Like I'd place myself in the middle of those situations. Somebody that seemed like they were trying to, punk somebody or bully somebody, I would get involved because I had all this anger and I didn't like that. So if it was somebody I knew or somebody I was close to, I was always, volunteering to fight somebody. That was my way of releasing all that was inside of me, all the anger that I had. Because once again, I never talked about it. I never got help. I never admitted it. So the whole time I'm running from it. So I'm just drunk and I'm just, I justified it like thinking that it was somebody that was, hurting like me or whatever the case. I would just figure, may the best man win type situation. Neither one of us were going to call the police on each other. It was just a situation where you're fighting. So that to me was my outlet. I didn't go and rob people. I wasn't, just picking out somebody randomly. It wasn't like that. I still had a conscience. I still was a good person. However, I had this issue deep inside me that I never talked about. And so that was the way I justified it to myself. I was like, hey, he was looking for it. I gave it to him. And that's the end of it, and I'd move on until the next confrontation. In my mind, I was thinking that, I wasn't doing wrong, which I was, but that's the way I convinced myself to the boys ranch and then jail. And then finally in 1993, getting into a fight, me and a friend of mine went into a store to get some beer. 3 others went in to do the same thing, and words were exchanged. Someone bumped into us. The guy I was with took offense to it. And, there was words exchanged between him and these other guys and almost a fight in the store. And then we made it to the cashier and got out and we're going to our car and they were leaving, going their way. Some more words led to fight. Ultimately, the guy I fought was much bigger. He was about 100 pounds heavier. And, he did some damage. And it was one of those things I had already pretty much put myself on autopilot. It was just like I wasn't going to take a loss. I wasn't going to accept that. I always carried a weapon at that point in my life. I was carrying a weapon around, loaded. They left the scene and I continued looking for them after the fight. They returned to the scene and I shot 2 of them. One died at the scene. Another was struck, but not fatally. Turned myself in a day and a half later. From there, went through the trial process, ultimately convicted of assault with a firearm on the one individual, the enhancement for the gun. And so that combined, that was 9 years to run consecutive to the second degree 15 to life sentence. Together, I had a 24 to life sentence.
Let's back up before that night. Did you have a sense leading up to then that this was an outcome that was going to happen? Did you care? Or did you even realize that you were off the rails and headed towards something like this?
I was out of control with my anger, and the dangerous part was I didn't give myself any other option. There was nothing like now. I know there's so many different directions I could go. At that point, backing down wasn't one of them, and losing wasn't one of them. That being the case, that's what made me so dangerous because, I carried a loaded weapon, but, I convinced myself that I'm a good person. I'm not going to use this if I don't have to, unless I'm defending my own life. I bought it legally. I had to go through the waiting process. At that point, I didn't have any felonies on my adult record. So I went through the 10-day waiting period and, it was all legal, but it was illegal to carry a loaded weapon, and so my train of thought was, I'm a good person. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not robbing people. I'm not stealing. As long as somebody doesn't try to hurt me, and that's the thing. It's weird how it translated into the physical side of it as a 6-year-old into an adult, young adult, that I convinced myself that no one's going to put their hands on me, not in any way, even though it wasn't a sexual way, period. I'm not going to be vulnerable. You're not going to hold me down. You're not going to hurt me. You're not going to. So I really kept replaying this message in my head that no one's going to put their hands on me. And if you do, you better look out. So that's what was so dangerous. So that's why I say autopilot, because it's like I already knew. what I was going to do before it even happened.
Next on the Prison Chronicles.
I truly believe everyone is redeemable.
The first time anyone ever put a gun on me, I was riding on the handlebars. My cousin Artie Barnes, AJ from 24th Street, was pedaling us over there, and a guy just rolled by on the Jeep, and Artie said, "Don't look back." And I look back. I'm like, man, he's turning around. Guy drives over the island. His music is playing loud, and he pulled a gun. Gave us the business lightweight, and we had to take that. We weren't armed. I remember I sat on the handlebars, waiting to be shot or to be released, and called us everything that they're supposed to call you, said what he had to say, and drove off and laughed at us. And that was the end of it. We rode over to Tower Records. I bought LL Cool J's Bigger and Deffer, and and I went to bed about my business that night. There was one more conflict and ultimately a retaliation. My cousin felt that was unacceptable to tolerate, and he ended up going to YA within months of that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, really kind of over that.
The sense of hopelessness and fear in a lot of these communities is unimaginable, where, at the age of 15, you already know that you're going to get shot or you're going to get killed or you're going to end up locked up.
The truth is, we talk about second chances when they get out, but for most of these men, and there's far fewer women who are incarcerated, but for most of these folks, they never had a first chance.
The Prison Chronicles is a limited series from the Break It Down show from executive producer Pete A. Turner. Hey, we release 5 new episodes a week of the Break It Down show, aka Bids. It would be awesome if you liked, shared, subscribed, reviewed. Those things always help us out. There are quite a few people to thank and give credit to, including co-producer John Leon Guerrero, who hosted, edited, and directed the music for the series. Also co-producer Tony Alvarado, who took all of the disparate interviews, exploded them into 1,000 pieces, and put them back together as the writer of the Prison Chronicles. The show is associate produced by Dr. Richard Leday, my field partner in Afghanistan. He helped us work on the research questions and understanding what work is being done academically in the prison systems. He's also a host on several of the episodes and a guest. Music is provided by Eric Stenglin, Hell Nasty, Dylan Sitz, Cushy, Faison. Also, John did some of the music himself too, so he deserves an extra hat tip for that. As always, I want to thank my producer, engineer, editor, Damian Georgiev. And of course, I want to thank all of our guests. There is so much wisdom and power in all of their experience and work, and I cannot say thank you to them enough. Thank you, all of you. If you have comments, suggestions, or just want to get in contact with the show, feel free to email me at pete@breakitdownshow.com or hit me up on social media at Pete A. Turner on all platforms. Thank you again. We'll see you next time.